child marriage?
The whole debate is about who defines what a child is and what an adult is. And historically, that dividing line has been on the basis of puberty. You go through puberty, and puberty can start as young as 6 or 7 years old. About 4% of girls complete puberty by age 9 in America today, according to the US Department of Health. But the point is that defining, what's funny is that conservatives have this kind of biological definition of man versus woman. And this is why transgenderism is wrong, because we have man and woman. It's a biological fact. Well, Then what is the biological fact of defining a child versus an adult? And when you start talking about biology, then conservatives suddenly say, no, it's what society says. Society says 18. But this is a very artificial number. It's based, if you look at history, the number 18 was only arrived at because of modern schooling and this kind of program to socialize, also because of the Enlightenment, socialize the population according to this public education program. And then you finish 18, your high school, then you go into the workforce. But it's all artificial. Biologically, historically, religions and cultures, they defined adulthood at puberty. And this is why when you look at marriage practices, not only of Muslims, but of Christians, Jews, Hindus, and Chinese, etc., is based on puberty. And you have this minor marriage, meaning under 18. Historically, traditionally, you define adulthood by biology. And this is why, according to canon law, like the minimum age of marriage in the Catholic Church was 12 years old always. And a lot of the church writings or from the church fathers early in Christianity, there were apocryphal gospels that talked about Mary being betrothed to Joseph when she was 12 years old. And that was the Jewish custom. And so she was married at 12, and she wasn't, and then she became pregnant before actually cohabiting with Joseph. So cohabitation happened at 16. So between 12 and 16, there was the Immaculate Conception, basically. And so she was a minor, right? So this is when Christians especially like criticize Muslims and they say, you are in support of minor marriage. I point to the fact that, look, you believe that the Virgin Mary was impregnated by God as a minor, under 16 years old. And that's something that they don't really have a response to. But I want to point to the larger discrepancy. Okay, gender is something that is male and female based on biology. Childhood and adulthood is also something that's determined by biology. And there's a bell curve, there's a bell curve. Some go through puberty later or earlier. And then there's an average.
So then you would leave it up to who? I mean, the government can't go and individually assess whether or not the person is finished with puberty before they're, I guess maybe.
No, but that's actually the case. Like in the US, there is no minimum age of marriage in most states. And what the law says is that, okay, if a minor wants to get married, it's through only consent of the parents.
Right.
And sometimes they have to go before a judge, but there are thousands, like in the past decade alone, I think there's over 100,000 minor marriages that take place in the United States. Let's give a lower end estimate and say that 10% of minors by the age of 14 have had their first sexual experience. Society is fine with that 10% number. There's no effort to say that, okay, these 14-year-olds or these 13-year-olds, few as they may be, shouldn't be engaged in that, and we should find measures to stop it. So it is socially acceptable. Why is that socially acceptable but not marriage is the question that I have. So why can't it be socially acceptable for an 18-year-old to marry a 14-year-old or a 13-year-old? That kind of minor marriage, it's fine for a 17-year-old to be sexually involved with a 14-year-old or younger.
Yeah.
But somehow marriage makes it weird or makes it somehow illegal or offensive. I don't understand the logic of that.
Well, the logic, I think, would have nothing to do with morality at all. It would just have to do with economics. I mean, an 18-year-old, anybody under the age of 18 is not really able to support themselves.
Who gives that standard? That seems to be a very capitalistic consumerist standard, because you're forced to buy a whole separate household as opposed to just living with your parents, and you're slowly working, you're making money, you don't have to pay rent, you can save because you're saving on cost of living. You build up that nest egg, and then you can actually buy a house instead of
Yeah.
relying on rent or having to pay exorbitant amount of interest on a mortgage. So it's like there are better ways to do things than, and this is how I think Americans traditionally did things prior to maybe 50 or 60 years ago. But we can't be stuck in a cultural practice that doesn't make sense.